Hi, welcome to Empower Her. My name is Priya, and I have a very special guest with me today, Alicia. Hi, Alicia, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. If you're listening for the first time, Empower Her podcast is about women and their professional journeys as well as their personal journeys as well. And my mission with this podcast is basically to uplift women from, every place. It doesn't matter where they are in the world. And I want to bring up stories of, women who are in whether in leadership roles or just in their careers, and trying to share their journey and how they've reached where they have reached so far, their struggles but also their wins and what they've learned so far, just so that it can help other women in their journey as well. I invited Alicia on my podcast because I started following her journey on LinkedIn, and I was just intrigued by your story and by the work that you're doing as well. And you have a podcast as well, Techno Gals, and I listened to it as well, and I was surprised that, oh, like, why aren't people listening to this? Because it is so much fun to just see a bunch of women hearing their stories as well. So if you haven't listened to that yet, we will be posting a link to that as well. But I'll let Alicia talk a little bit more about her and the podcast and the work that she's doing. So off to you, Alicia.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And all the nice compliments about our podcast and our content and what we're trying to do with Techno Gals. So I'll give you a little bit of professional and personal history of myself. I started out wanting to go into education post graduating and wanted to help other students. Post getting my master's degree, I realized that education was one of those really important catalysts in your careers to giving you the confidence and the experience necessary to apply for those next level jobs and just continuing to push your career. And I wanted to help other people embrace education as like their beginning catalyst to changing their career, their trajectories. And so I went into education. And if anyone's ever worked in education before, whether it's for secondary or primary school, they will probably all agree that there is a massive amount of like red tape and bureaucracy that allows you to make monumental changes into how curriculum is formed, how we think about curriculum, how we think about delivering curriculum. And that, because I was very young as an educator, was a little bit of a setback for me because I was like, wow, I want to come in here and I want to inspire and I want to go. And that's just not the way that academia tends to work. So I decided I would go back into corporate and be able to and make an influence in that space. And with that, I transitioned into working for a patient experience company that worked on understanding and researching patient experience from our healthcare systems and what behaviors are most important to patients. So I started to get into more of the technical or more into the experience part of the workplace. I was recruited away to work for a company that was a content management system, a CMS, and worked as like a technical project manager, helping customers set up their websites and manage their content, put out new content on a regular basis. That job was super cool. Got to work with wireframes and designers and really got to kind of experience the whole part of like sanity testing post a website going live and making sure everything looks good. So that was really cool. And that company was experiencing a lot of massive growth through mergers and acquisitions. And part of that kind of helped my career trajectory. So this is going to look like I fully believe that no one's career is ever quite linear where it just makes sense and just continues to go this path. But you're like, doot, doot, and you're kind of going all these different ways and it's never what you quite expect it to be. So it's going to seem like I've jumped around quite a bit. And that's also the reality of my career is that you have to pivot and you have to figure out what makes the most sense for what you're trying to do next and how you're trying to grow. And not only that, but I also think sometimes it's like right place, right time. I was working for a company that was growing quite a bit. And in that process, because I had the tenure, because I had the knowledge and experience, I was kind of this next selected person to kind of keep growing that company in that situation. Eventually, though, I feel like a lot of people probably max out where they feel like they can do and what they can learn and contribute at specific roles. So I decided to leave that company, and and then I went to a SaaS startup company that was Series C, and then after that, I was applied to AWS, and I'm now at AWS for 2 years. And I lead our customer solution manager team for our ISV customers, which are our independent software vendors that are typically fulfilling some type of need for our B2B customers. And so it's super cool. I've learned a lot at AWS, and every single one of the companies that I've worked at, I've learned definitely quite a bit. Along my career history, I'm a mom. I have two boys, a 14-year-old and 11-year-old currently. And they've been, I've been a single mom for most of my career. And so that's always been an interesting balance, trying to balance the mother demands while also trying to grow your career and make for sure that you are meeting expectations in the workplace. Outside of work, I've got some chickens. I live on an acreage, and I play sand volleyball in the summer and love just a good fire pit where at the end of the week it's a nice relaxing time just to sit outside and have conversation and kind of recap. So that's a blend of my professional and personal careers.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing your story and just sharing who you are with the audience as well. Um, so let's start a little bit about um, customer experience, as you talked about right now that you're working at AWS. um, what got you interested in the field of customer solutions or customer experience?
I think for me, it was like this what, while my career has taken weird and interesting pivots, that the root of it has always been helping someone, whether it was a student, whether it was a customer, whether it was a patient. There's always been a root of helping someone.
Mm,
And post leaving education and moving back into helping what was patient research, that to me seemed like a very logical place to be. I enjoy research. I enjoy white papers and learning about studies and experiments that are happening and advancing our knowledge base. And so going into a place that was research focused made a lot of sense to me at that point in time. And while there, I kind of got that tech itch bug, as a lot of people do. And so that also made sense to me when I went to go work for the content management system. It was supporting marketers that aren't necessarily tech or programming or code heavy, but they have a need to update their website on a daily basis with whatever's happening for their companies. And they don't necessarily have the ability to submit it to a developer or a programmer that's going to help them upload whatever content they have, organize it, put it out there, change hero image, any of those types of micro changes to a website, micro or large changes to a website. And that
yeah.
made sense, like empowering people to be able to do their job faster, easier, better. So at the root of it, it's always just been helping people. When I was leading a global professional services organization, it's the same thing there. There's always minor tweaks that need to be enabled or workarounds that have to happen with software. Software is never going to be 100% perfect for anyone. I just don't think that works because everyone has niche needs. And professional services is there to kind of help bridge that gap from what the product can do organically versus what might be a special, unique case.
Yep.
And that's, again, helping someone do their job faster, better, easier, more efficiently, more effectively. So it just is a very organic place for me to live in, is just solving something.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Um, so when it comes to, any kind of, customer solution strategies, in the past few years, that you have seen or, implemented, in your job, I feel like, there is a delicate balance between, getting the customer's feedback or getting the customer involved in forming those strategies, but then also, whatever product company you're working for and what their brand is, that also plays a role. But how have you balanced that? Yeah, both of those things, I guess.
So balancing like the customer strategy and
Yeah, customers feedback, but also the companies. values, I would say, or whatever the brand stands for, that kind of a thing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, working at AWS, we are, while we promote it that we are customer obsessed and competitor aware. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. I had to cough. Um, Well, we advertise that we are customer obsessed, competitor aware, and that is definitely something that is a part of our culture. And so some companies will say that and maybe not necessarily live it and breathe it on a regular basis. One of the things I do love about AWS is that they do live and breathe that. So every year, my team gets to meet with their customers and essentially kind of has like a mini, what we call working backwards session.
Yeah, it's like kind of like reverse engineering, maybe, is that it?
Sort of. It's really trying to identify what matters to their company most this year. So with the key stakeholders that we're working with, we're asking them, like, at the end of the year, if we exit doing XYZ, what would it be that made you have like a banner year, that made you have the best year, blowing your goals out of the water? What are those things? And that kind of guides how we create our strategy for supporting them. They could say to us, hey, we need to, our cost on our spend is more than we expected. We need to spend some time trying to reduce our cogs so that we can understand it and deliver a better margin. Or they could say it's super important to us that we hit 500 new logos this year, and so go to market is going to be extremely important to this year. Or they could say, hey, we're really just trying to expand and be disruptors in the market. We need some really cool co-innovation that's going to allow us to disrupt or meet different market needs, or just move into a different market altogether. Or maybe they want to grow regionally through different geos. So everything we do in my role hyper focuses and works backwards from what that customer has communicated as a really important strategy for this year for them to achieve their company goals. And that's one of the things I super love about working at AWS and with the customers we get to work with, is that it's not pushing our own personal agendas for them. And if you work at AWS, you know that cost optimization is a very large part of our day-to-day function, because we want customers to invest in that process of optimizing on a regular basis. So it's interesting that you say blend, because for us, it's not really so much of a blend, but it's like, how do we create that right strategy per customer that's going to help them accelerate their year? And that's one of the unique things about the customer solutions manager role that I also really enjoy, is that we consider ourselves a trusted advisor. We're not an attainment based role, so there's no variable compensation associated with us trying to hit a specific goal, but our goals are strictly tied to our customer also achieving what their goals are. With that, we're never going to not get feedback. We work with customers that are pushing the boundaries on our service limits, on our services, and so we're constantly getting feedback from them on what works for them with the services they're engaging and using most. We connect them with our service teams that are uh, owners of that product or service, and make for sure that we have that continuous feedback loop to help support the advancement and betterment of that service. And ideally, we're working on things that are going to not just benefit one customer, but are going to benefit several customers at one time.
Mhm. Yeah. um and when it comes to challenges, are there any particular challenges that you want to share, maybe with the audience, that you faced while you were in this field, and basically how did you overcome that challenge?
I think I think the challenge is there's always more good ideas than there's time to implement. And one of the biggest challenges I think we experience, and probably most of our customers do as well, is that there truly is like a time poverty situation we're all balancing. And so you really have to be focused on how do we make for sure that we don't allow these other good ideas to distract us from that overarching picture that of what we set out to do for the year. And those challenges are constantly kind of asking and reminding customers or whoever you're working with, like, is this more important than what we set out to do at the beginning of this year? Because we don't necessarily have the resources to all of a sudden explore this Fifth Avenue or the Seventh Avenue or whatever the number may be. And so, how does this rate into the overall big picture and constantly bring people back to the overarching goals that we're trying to achieve? And we call it ruthless prioritization. because that's really what it takes to stay focused and to help to drive. The more avenues we have, the more diluted we're going to be, because our resource numbers tend to stay somewhat constant, or they shift minor, but they're not going to have these big explosive changes in them usually. So we have to be super selective on what we want to focus on and what's actually going to be impactful for the company and the employees that are supporting those goals.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then a huge part of, I feel like, whoever is in the field of customer solutions or customer experience or customer success, obviously, the customers play a huge part in it. And one of the things that I've learned in this field is, how you basically navigate a difficult customer, or maybe like a customer who had like maybe a negative experience, or maybe not something that lived up to their expectations. But do you have any advice for people who are, going through the situation, who are maybe, in a similar field like us? Yeah.
So here's my best advice for anyone that has to deal with challenging and unhappy situations or customers. Um, Bad news doesn't get better with time. So there's like literally no reason to put it off, because waiting 7 days, waiting 48 hours, waiting 2 weeks, you're not all of a sudden going to arrive at a different answer that you can give this customer. The trust is already damaged. So you really have to move into a hyper care point of view so that you can begin to band-aid and bridge that gap again. So I would always say my preferred methodology is, once there's some unhappy situation that you're trying to manage, is to get just a few people in the room. 20 people in the room is not going to be effective. 10
Mm,
people in the room, probably also not effective. So who's the person that we are supporting and trying to figure out the best way to resolve the situation with? And who are the few critical people on our side that can listen, that can understand, and that can drive results? I would recommend only a few people, and those few people tend to be the only communicators going forward. One person is the sole communicator on anything going back and forth that is
mm,
going to help resolve that situation. The second part, once you've kind of got the room narrowed down to who's actually going to drive an impact, is extremely clear communication. What was the expectation? What is the gap? What does it take to resolve it and to make you feel confident in moving forward again? Because if we're over here ideating on some solution that's not actually going to resolve the issue, we're
mm.
wasting our time. So we
Yeah.
need to be super clear on what was the expectation, what were you hoping happened, and what does it take to make it right in your eyes now. Once you kind of have that clear communication and path, then it's commit to your create your strategy and commit to it, let the customer know it. And at that point in time, no deadlines, milestones can be missed. Even if it's a follow up at 5 p.m. that says, we were going to give you an update on this. We don't have
Mm,
XYZ problem solved yet, but I committed to an update for you. We are still working on it. Here's kind of what's taking longer. Our next touch point is tomorrow at noon, or whatever time it is. Because at
mm.
that point, that trust is damaged, and you're going to have to work really hard to repair it. And any single minor missed communication expectation is just like, I knew you couldn't do it. I knew you guys weren't going to be able to follow through on it. And it's going to make that
Yeah.
exacerbate that issue.
Yeah. 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 I'm glad you said that, because that has definitely, something that I've seen a lot. And I've seen, obviously customers getting more frustrated, even if they've had like a bigger issue. It's the non-communication, or maybe the lack of communication, that frustrates them, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely take that advice. um and yeah, this is a little bit of a pivot, but we'll talk about women empowerment, because obviously that's what the podcast is about. And I was just wondering, what does women empowerment mean to you, especially when it comes to, women working, or women in the workplace, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a huge advocate for advancement of women in any male dominated space, but obviously because I'm in the tech space, that tends to be the area where I focus the most. And that's where Techno Gals was inspired from this year. I run Techno Gals with my co-founder Tracy Gorman, and she's one of my BFFs, and it's been great to partner with her on it. And we're just having conversations at the end of 2023 that was just kind of highlighting some frustrating experiences we still have as women in a male dominated space. There's many times, even in this year, I've been one of 20 or one of 25 or one of 30 people. When I say one of, I mean one female in meetings that should have a wider representation of
Mm,
females in it. And it's sometimes baffling to me that we don't. And so we started Techno Gals to kind of begin to, much like many other organizations do, highlight this gap and invite people into the conversation, invite people in to participate on closing the gap. And so that was kind of our first, like, how do we empower women? We normalize conversations like this. And also we encourage people to step into the space, because if you can bet on yourself, I think if you've watched the podcast, you've heard me talk about women just have to bet on themselves and take that leap of faith. It's never going to be, if you wait for your plan to be perfect, you'll never get it going, because we
mm,
can't let perfection stop progress. And also there's always a reason to not move forward. And so we started this Techno Gals. We don't have a lot of experience in the space, but we wanted to take that leap ourselves and start to put our content out there on how do we inspire women, how do we support women. One way that I think companies can continue to support empowerment of women is not just sending the email. Like, there has to be a targeted plan on how you actually support women in their advancement, whether that is making sure you have specific avenues for women to get mentors into the space. If you look at the table, I would say good or bad, depending on who you're talking to about this. I'm really good about calling out when there's not a lot of female representation in the room, because that leads to a bunch of biased decisions when we don't have equal representation. So a part of women empowerment is also being like, hey, we've only got me here. Would like to
mm.
hear other females' perspective on this.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
how do we get more women at this meeting so that we don't just make a decision based upon a bunch of, tunnel vision? I sometimes look across our leadership teams and say, oh, you don't have any females on your leadership team. Are you looking to change that? Because some people are just like not paying attention to it, not intentionally. It's just not top of mind for them. They're doing their day-to-day business. They're really focused on what they're trying to do. And this
yeah,
having that diversity representation is not necessarily what they're focused on. So
yeah,
asking those questions is also part of women empowerment, making sure that your company has some type of avenue for women to network with other women, making sure that you highlight and spotlight women that are starting to move into the space and giving them the tools and resources available to advance. That's another great thing about AWS is we have a learn and be curious culture. And so we are encouraged to do a lot of professional development, to spend time learning a new area. And that's also part of empowerment, not just for women, but for anybody. And that should be a part of it. The other thing that I love is we won't be able to change it. When I say we, I mean women, organically by ourselves. It will take a partnership with men that are already at the table, so to speak, and asking them to support other women to come to the table too. Just trying to get in there and like, we're going to eventually we do it and strong our way in there is, I think, a harder path than partnering with folks that are already at the table and figuring out how do we work in conjunction together to get more equal representation. And so that's the other key part, is making sure we have that partnership with people that are already breaking those grounds, and how do we bring women into the mix.
yeah, yeah. I absolutely agree with that. I think, yeah, you made some really good points about, first of all, as women, we definitely need to like advocate, for ourselves. That's like the first step. But then also, it's about, when it comes to organizations, how they have like some kind of like actions instead of, because obviously actions mean more than just words, because a lot of organizations can come up with like, oh, um, things to say on their websites, or just in their company values, they're saying that, oh, like, we support diversity, but it is the how are you doing that. It's not about just saying that, okay, we hired a bunch of people from like different areas and of different genders, but it's about how are you making sure that in their own unique way they are set up for success. So yeah, I think that's something that is definitely currently being worked on, and I'm glad to see that organizations are doing that work and starting to do that work and recognizing that, okay, yes, we definitely need to take a look at that and see how we can come up with more kind of things. And yeah, I think mentorship, as you also said, plays a huge part. Obviously, in my podcast, since I've been talking to a lot of women, one thing that constantly comes up is all these women do give some kind of credit to a mentor. Whatever level they are at, they are like, I have this mentor, that mentor. And that involves men and women, which means that a lot of men are kind of doing it right now. But I feel like there is also a need to need for those men to kind of like come up and I guess maybe share with the world how they've done that, and how men can also like support women in the workplace,
Yeah.
I guess.
For
Yeah.
sure. And it can be as simple as saying, like, if there's already a man at the table, as I'll keep kind of putting that in quote marks, um, by them just endorsing and introducing some female. Like, hey, I've been working with XYZ
Mhm.
person. She's freaking awesome. She's driving this result and this impact. Wanted you guys to know her and know about her work. And it can be very small, simple gestures like that that
Yeah.
do allow that person to get their break or their opportunity to being having more impactful projects or being able to be invited back for their content, or I wouldn't say content, but their feedback on something. And that's critical. And how do we also show empowerment?
Yeah.
One thing
Yeah.
I think women are really guilty about, I shouldn't say women, there's probably, I'm going to speak for women, because I'm saying this about myself as well, is that we tend to like be super humble. We are caregivers majority of the time, and we know that we're not doing anything solely alone. We have mentors helping us. And so we have this like humble barrier that, as I think women, we also need to break out of our comfort zone on. And there's this new and super awesome program called like I Am Remarkable. And I participated in this session earlier this year. And it's about how do you like take credit. And a lot of people don't want to take credit because they feel like they're being, oh, what's the word? Like it's not, what's the word? Oh my gosh, I can't remember it. It'll come to me.
Yeah.
But it's of how do we get them to not feel like they're being cocky, but they're just being
Yeah.
confident.
Yeah.
And so it's okay if what you're saying is based in facts. And so it's getting people to say, I'm remarkable because, and whatever it is that it's remarkable for them. Maybe it's because they're raising children and balancing work. Maybe it's because they're a caregiver, or they're the sandwich generation and taking care of mom and dad who are aging and also raising their children plus working. Whatever it is, maybe it's remarkable because you had this breakthrough idea. But saying like I'm remarkable because, and finishing out with whatever that is, kind of gets us out of that comfort zone. And when I did this activity with my team, they were all like, this is really hard. And I'm like, I know. And that's why we're doing it. Because once we do it enough, it's no longer that hard because we've got that habit down. And so you
Yeah.
have to embrace that discomfort and start to take a little bit of like remove your humbleness and start to showcase how awesome you are.
Yeah, I think it's just something that I think I'm not gonna generalize all women, but
Yeah.
it is definitely very common in women to, as you said, be humble. It's as simple as, if someone came to me and was like, oh, like, Priya, you did this project and you were awesome, you're great. And I would be like, oh, thank you, but it's actually my team which
Uh-huh.
did that. So, it's not just me. And that would just to me, I would be like, oh, I'm being humble and that's good. But in actuality, you're not really like, giving the credit to yourself. And so yeah, I think as women, we need to like, be okay and just say thank you.
Yes, yes.
That's it.
And even if in your situation, be like, cool, I worked with a team on this. I'll certainly let them know your feedback as well. But thanks for letting me know. Like, I worked really hard on it and I'm super happy with the results of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's definitely great advice. And then for anyone who is, starting a career maybe in customer solutions or customer experience, what would be your advice when it comes to learning and development, or making sure that you're growing in that career?
So if you're starting out, I would suggest my best advice would be to say yes to almost everything. So unlike what I recently just told you where I said we have to ruthlessly prioritize and that means saying no to a bunch of things that are going to be distractors. If you're brand new and starting out, I think one of the things but the best things you can do is say I don't know that yet and raise your hand to say yes and take on the assignment. Because if you're just like, I don't know how to do that, I'm not going to raise my hand, I'm not going to do it because I don't know how to do it, then you're not going to have those stretch moments that allow you to gain the knowledge you need in order to kind of advance and move in your career. So, highly recommend saying yes as long as you have the bandwidth to support it.
Awesome. Um, and then we will do a quick pivot again, I guess, more into like your personal life, and more about, being a mother, because I'm sure a lot of our audience are, working mothers as well. And, it definitely helps when, people share their experience and share what they have learned so far. So, um, can you share a little bit more about, your journey as a single mother, and maybe, you know, a challenge that you can talk about? How did you overcome that? What did you learn?
Yeah, so I don't know that I think all of parenting is challenging. And every kind of like milestone within parenting is its own set of challenges. I think my best advice as I think about this, I've spent a lot of time actually recently being very like introspective and retrospective about parenting and balancing a career in both of those. Um, my biggest piece of advice is don't wish away the time. And I think I'm guilty of this, and I'll explain what I mean by it. When my kids were really little, and I was a single parent when they were pretty. I think they were 2 and 4, or 2 and 5, somewhere in that area. So still pretty little, needed a lot of help. I was like, oh, once they can just put on their own shoes. Oh, once they can just brush their own teeth, this is going to be easier. Oh, once they can microwave their own whatever it is, this is going to be a little bit easier. Oh, once
Yeah.
they can load the dishwasher, this is going to be easier. Oh, once they can, ride their own bike without being worried that they're going to fall, this is going to get easier. And
Mhm.
none of it has ever gotten easier. So my biggest piece of advice is to don't wish it away. And I feel like I did in a lot of regards. I was like, oh, it'll just get easier. It's going to get easier once they're not in diapers, they're not potty training, once they don't wake up in the middle of the night because they're having nightmares or whatever it is. Um, is to not wish it away and then embrace that moment, because that moment in time with your kids is literally gone forever. But whatever report you're working on for work is probably going to be repeatable and due again next week. So take those moments to be very present. And even though that this moment is very hard or very taxing or tiring, like that's what we signed up for. And it's sometimes more hard or easier in some phases of it. But I have a child who's 14 now, and another one in middle school. And I spent all this time thinking it was going to get easier once they could do all these things. And it's never gotten easier, because
Yeah.
every step of that block has just different challenges are thrown at you. So
Mhm.
maybe now it's more of the bullying or not fitting in versus I have to help them with their pants or their shoes or something of that nature. And so don't wish that way that time, because it's just like it's not going to get easier or better. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Just parenting is hard and it is challenging and it takes time. So put it in the context of that it's going to be challenging, and that's okay. And I feel like now that I've looked back on my parenting when they were younger, I see all my team. Well, some of my team will have like little kid pictures, and they have those squishy little 4-year-old hands and little babies like that are now in super adorable costumes because we're filming this around Halloween, and I'm like, oh, and I melt, and I'm like wishful that I had more of that time back in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think being present in that moment is definitely something that, a lot of parents do feel like. I think I've heard like kind of like a similar experience from other parents as well. So, yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that.
Mom's guilt is real. And I don't know how it ever officially goes away because I just don't know. And it's like you only get one life to try to like maximize what you're trying to achieve. And um, I think about this question a lot though, and what I would do differently if I had all the knowledge I had now. I mean, like they say, hindsight is always 2020, but I would definitely be a different mom. And it doesn't mean that I was the best mom I could be at that moment. But now I
Mhm.
realize there's some improvement here as well. And let's maybe take that life lesson and figure out how you can apply it for the next years as you continue to parent kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So when it comes to, single mothers, uh, is there anything that you wish, when it comes to especially like the society, how, they can better support single mothers?
I think I'm going to speak about myself because, again, it'd be hard to make generalizations. But I think it's difficult to sometimes ask for help. As single moms, we can only be in one place at one time. And there's not even two of us to take, if you have two kids, if you have multiples, to take them to two different sporting events. And so there was multiple times where I had back-to-back sporting events or little practices, and they had to come at the exact same time because one kid is too little to stay home. So I'm like, hey, we're going to go and support brother today and watch him at his soccer practice or whatever it may be. And then right after that one's done, probably they wanted to go home because they were tired post practice. But I'm like, oh, now we're going to go to basketball practice. So you're going to come along and watch other brother that just supported you go to basketball practice. And I never felt very comfortable asking for help or asking for if someone else was available to help so that or could drive them there, or even another mom that was already going to go there, or dad, any
Yeah.
other parent that was going to go there, be like, hey, can you pick up my son and bring them back home?
Mhm.
Because I always feel like this is my responsibility. I signed up for this, and I'm going to make for sure that I meet the expectations of it. But I do think that being willing to ask for help, or even on small minor things, makes a world of difference in your stress level, and it doesn't necessarily impact in a negative way your kid's experience with that sporting event or whatever the XYZ thing is. I not recently, but about a year ago, had a mom reach out to me, and she was like, hey, can you pick my child up from school and drop him off at my house? And I didn't really know this mom super well, and that didn't really work out for my day. Like it wasn't, I had to kind of carve out an extra time to give. I was like, absolutely. Because in that moment when I got that text, I was like, if she's asking me, she's probably already ran through a list of other people because we don't know each other super, super well.
Yeah.
And she's probably like, crap, how do I get this done? And I need some support right now. And the last thing I was going to do is say no, and then
Mhm.
see who else, how many more people she had to ask. So being willing to ask for help, but then if you can help and support other moms,
Mhm.
like be available to help with that ride or help with whatever it is, and support their kiddo through this journey as well. We need more community support for moms, and I don't even mean this for like single moms in general. Just parenting in general is hard, and the more
Mhm.
we can offer community support and not judge or pick apart how someone else is raising their kids or parenting them, is
Yeah.
it's going to make the overall process better.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. um. Okay. I guess my next question is, back to women empowerment. And I think we touched a little bit on this, but um, I wanted to talk more about, how men can support women in the workplace. And one of the other things that I wanted to talk about was, how is there a way where we can make men understand better the kind of challenges that women face in the workplace. um, Obviously, women are starting to talk about their challenges more, but I do feel like, it's more like a community right now within women, which is happening, whereas it's like, women are sharing stories with each other and, telling each other how we can, support and giving each other like tools and resources. But I feel like there's also a need to do that with like other genders as well, whether it's men or, any other genders too. But um yeah, I was just wondering if you had like any kind of thoughts on that as well.
Well, I mentioned like just men inviting women or advocating or doing one small thing of endorsing someone, and that can certainly be a beginning catalyst for how men can get involved. The other parts on how do we help people understand it is maybe like by starting small and communicating with your direct male friends or your partner or whoever it may be, and just starting to highlight these experiences. And I realize a lot of because they're not experiencing it on the same ratio or the same significance or severity as women, sometimes like they just don't even know what happens. So in my
Mhm.
situation with my partner, he's not actively making any other person's day harder, or if he not even aware if he would be inviting someone to a table or not, because it's not like something that they have to think about. But for women, we think about it all this time, because we are trying to break that barrier and we're consistently pushing those boundaries. So it's super top of mind for us. And
Mhm.
just starting to share the stories that I experience at work, he was like, "What?" He's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah." So small things, like even just sharing with your friends or your partner about what happened to you at work that was like, "I can't believe this." Sometimes I take little mini pictures and I'm like, "Look, I'm one of 20. I'm one of 20." Like
Mhm.
you think that I'm making this stuff up, but like the representation is still that wild in
Yeah,
2024.
yeah.
And that starts to bring awareness. And it's
Mhm.
definitely, I know, has influenced the way he thinks about these conversations and who he's inviting to participate in meetings, because he didn't realize that it was like a blind spot before, because it
Mhm.
doesn't cross his mind because they're not experiencing it. And so
Yeah.
that's like one of those small things you can do, is just to start to talk about it, because if you're not experiencing it, you don't necessarily know that this is what someone else is experiencing or struggling with.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's absolutely true. And I was basically doing some research, and I found out that, it was like, I think there was a study where they basically found out that over 90% of men believed that there was like no equality issues. Um, and it was like baffling to me. I was like, what?
That's
How is
wild, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
super wild. But I also do not fault them for it, because like it's like they're not necessarily aware because they're
Hmm.
not experiencing it. And if they're
Yeah.
not walking in someone else's shoes, it's really hard to understand that situation. So that's why I'm saying it's super important just to even start talking about it with
Hmm.
whoever is someone that's close to you or your male colleagues.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, like if you are witnessing something that you think is just egregious in the workplace, like you have to also be comfortable enough to call them out on it. And I
Yeah.
think that's like some people are comfortable kind of confronting, and some people are not, and that's okay. But you've got to find that avenue, because that's part of women empowerment, is calling out bad behaviors when you see it, because people may not be necessarily aware that they're intention in doing it, because it could be unintentional, and we have to disrupt and also call out that potential bias when we witness it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then what are you excited about, when it comes to your career path, in the next couple of years, whether it comes to customer solutions or anything else, but, what are you excited about, I guess?
That's a great question. For me, while I work in the customer solution experience space, I'm probably more invested in leadership,
Hmm.
because if I can inspire and challenge and support my team through my leadership and my guidance, then they're going to drive really awesome customer experiences as well organically. So from a leader perspective, I say this all the time, and when I started being a leader, how many ever years ago, I'm almost embarrassed to look back at the person I was when I started being a leader. And I was like, oh my God, I was doing everything like super terrible. And all the research says not to do any of these things. And I don't even know how I got in that job in the first place, because if I look back on it, it's so embarrassing. And now I can see, you fast forward, and I'm like, I'm such a better leader now, but I'm still not the best leader. I have so much more room for growth and potential, so much more room for how do I challenge, how do I coach, how do I inspire, how do I push them to their best potential limits. And I think when I think about what am I most excited about, it's how do I continue to push my leadership knowledge, abilities, skills for any biases I have and interrupt those, or could I have asked them a different set of questions that would have coached them differently? And it's always a learning process, and that's probably what I'm most excited about, is how do I continue to evolve to being the best version of myself as a leader, to supporting my team.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, and I usually end the podcast with, asking a question, uh, which is basically, what are the three things that you can share that you're proud of yourself?
Mm, three things. This is a good question. I am really proud of the fact that I'm at this point in my career with the life, the management of like being a single mom, growing in my career, being even like a little bit of a different parent. Because if anyone meets my kids, like they'll be like, your kids are pretty cool, which I love that. They're not perfect, but they're pretty cool. But then on top of that, they're just really interesting, because some of my friends will witness conversations my kids have with me, and they're like, you talk about that with your kid? And I'm like, oh yeah, like we normalize a lot of conversations around here. And so I like that I kind of broke some barriers in raising them to have a more inclusive, or just like open communication style than maybe what we've historically seen from like my generation of raising. The other thing that I'm really proud of is my persistence, and then my grit. To constantly show up on a regular basis, to constantly try to keep molding yourself and evolving yourself, is a very challenging and taxing process, because you're really being introspective on a very high frequency about how could I have handled that conversation better? How could I have done better? And I do this all the time. I go back to my team and I'm like, hey, can we talk about this conversation? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, I think I could have shown up better. I think I could have given you better advice. And part of that grit and just kind of like molding yourself over and over again is something I'm really proud of. I don't walk into a room thinking I'm the smartest person in that room. I don't walk in thinking I have all the answers. And so I'm just there to be as much of a learner as I am. It's also a person that brings the experiences I have to the table. And so those are the things that I think I'm most proud of.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I just have to, I mean, because you mentioned something, and I think it kind of like also, I have to bring this up because, this is something that I am seeing happening with like parenting. And I'm really glad that it's happening where, parents are talking about like, issues with their kids, which maybe, not be so common, or maybe, not everyone is comfortable doing it. But also about, since we are talking about women empowerment, if you do have like a male child, how can you, also bring your son up in a way where, you kind of like start teaching him how he can support a woman, because obviously he's gonna be surrounded by women, whether it's his mother, or maybe it's just a friend or a colleague at work. But yeah, do you have like any advice on that as well?
Yeah. Oh, yes, I do. Uh, I have two boys, and my friends used to tell me, they're like, I feel like if you had women, you would have raised really like badass women. And I'm like, yeah, I think so too. I said, but I think I have a really better opportunity to help mold two men into the next evolution of how men engage in society. So one of the things I did was when the eldest one went through puberty, he also learned women's puberty and what girls are going through at that same point in time. I'm like, while you are experiencing this voice change and your body changing, women are doing something as well, or girls are doing something well at a similar equivalency that is uncertain for them. They don't know how to feel. Their bodies are going through these hormonal changes. You need to be sensitive to that. If someone all of a sudden feels like they're acting differently or you can't understand why, like this is something that women go through on a regular basis, on a monthly basis going forward. So like you need to understand that, and you need to be able to like, how can I support someone going through this hormonal change? That's not just really for the one time. It's like forever until
Mhm.
they reach this next stage in their life. And
Mhm.
so we went through those conversations. Our school still does like the sex education that teaches them about their parts that are for their gender. But I'm like, we're gonna learn about the girl parts too. So
Mhm.
I made for sure that they knew just both sides of the story and it wasn't just from their perspective. And now we have these like random conversations all the time at the house on both genders, regardless of who's experiencing what. And we have normalized that conversation, and
Mhm.
which are I think we began to normalize that conversation, which is great.
Mhm.
That's one way I think that we can kind of help bridge this gap, and how we can raise young men to be more emotionally kind of aware of their female counterparts.
Yeah, absolutely. And, especially when it comes to like mothers, and, obviously we're gonna grow old, and, things are gonna happen again because, there's like a huge shift when you go through puberty. But when you reach your 50s, you also go through like a huge change when you
Yeah,
start your menopause as well. And I feel like in both of those times, like women don't talk about that enough, where people are still not aware about menopause. I'm like surprised. I see videos on social media where men are not aware even like what menopause is.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad that just starting that conversation, and just having that open communication. I think that that's like the key to making things better in a way. But thank you for sharing your story, your opinions, and also just like what you've learned in your journey. And I'm definitely sure that it's going to help a lot of women who are going through the same thing, but also men as well, or any other genders who are listening to this video. So, yeah, thank you for sharing, and thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I love it, and I'm glad that I can help be a part of your community.
Awesome. Thank you so much.